Welcome to Smashhead here, where we explore the topics we need today in order to create the future of tomorrow. Today's topic is supply and demand. There are many factors that affect the price and availability of various goods and services in an economy. As a result, there are many tools that economists use in order to determine how those factors affect our lives at various levels. But there is one factor that dominates how the price and availability of various goods is determined, and that factor is called the law of supply and demand. Since its effects have been a little more pronounced than usual over the last 2 years or so, in today's video, we're going to take a look at what the law of supply and demand is, how it works, how it affects your life, and how you can use your knowledge of it in order to try and make some better financial decisions. Now, first off, I want to point out that the law of supply and demand, like most things in economics, is not an exact science. It's really more of a model or a guide that economists use in order to help explain the movement of prices at various levels of the economy. Specifically, the law of supply and demand studies the relationship between an entity selling a thing and another one buying that thing. And although we're talking about economics here, like most things in economics, this subject really just comes down to psychology, and it points out what we already know intuitively as consumers. And that is, if you raise the price of something, fewer people will be able and or willing to purchase that thing, thereby decreasing demand. Alternatively, if you lower the price of that thing, more people will be able and or willing to purchase it, therefore raising demand. Now, this is generally true. It's not in all cases, but it's still only one side of this subject. Aside from the obvious, i.e. more people will want a thing that costs less versus fewer people will want a thing that costs more, the other side of this equation has to do with the production cost of those goods. In fact, the exact same law applies here. If a good suddenly sees an increase in demand, like say, I don't know, toilet paper, non-medical masks, and latex gloves in mid-2020, for example, then you will see an increase in producers trying to supply those goods to the market because they're trying to grab the increased profit margin and or revenue. As more and more producers enter the market, however, they will eventually meet and or exceed the demand and cause the prices to fall back down where they comfortably balance out with the supply. Now, I just want to point out that if you think about any system whatsoever, whether it has anything to do with money or not, you will find this law at work somewhere in there trying to find an equilibrium between some sort of supply and demand. The result of these interactions end up determining, to a large extent, it's not the only factor involved, but it ends up determining what volume of goods will be available in the market and at what price those goods will be available for purchase by the consumer. I think we've all kind of experienced this market determination firsthand. You know, we've seen it when a neighbor prices his house $100,000 more than comparable properties in the neighborhood, or your cousin tried to sell his 8-year-old car for $4,000 less than a brand new one. These hypothetical people will have come face to face with the law of supply and demand in the form of absolutely zero interest in the things they are selling. The trends of supply and demand can be measured and monitored using a standard XY graph and some basic algebra. First, a good is chosen and the quantity sold is placed on the horizontal axis. The price paid for that quantity is placed on the vertical axis. The interaction between these two axes as prices move up and down determine what's called the demand curve. The demand curve typically slopes downward from left to right across the graph. A similar graph is then plotted using the quantity produced and at what price. This forms what is called the supply curve, and it tends to slope upward from left to right across the graph. Now, because both of these graphs have quantities on a horizontal axis and the prices on a vertical axis, they can be placed one on top of the other like this. Where the demand curve intersects or crosses the supply curve is what is called the market equilibrium. That is where the supply perfectly meets the demand and determines the price the market is willing to pay for that good at that quantity. This subject obviously goes much deeper than I can present in a YouTube video, but if you want more information, it is but an internet search away. Well, if it isn't obvious by now, the law of supply and demand determines what you pay for even the most basic things you need to live, like groceries. Add the pressure of something like inflation to this process, and I think you can start to see just how complex these relationships are and how sensitive the market is to even just the smallest change. Typically, the consequences of rising prices means that people have to search for alternatives where the quality and value derived from that good can be diminished at best. When demand rises to unusual levels, the prices follow, and soon enough, a product is not selling quite as well anymore. If this situation is also met by an increase in production costs and manufacturers are unable to just lower the price to usual levels, then there are some alternatives that they may result to that isn't very good for you, the consumer. What I'm referring to here is called shrinkflation, and what it means is that that bottle of dish soap you just purchased last Saturday for the same price as the one Saturday before had less soap in the same size bottle. Who buys that much soap? This is the process of shrinking in size or quantity, and sometimes even in quality, in order to trick consumers into paying more for less. How big is that candy bar? Exactly. How many squares are on that roll of toilet paper? Is that soda bottle skinnier than it used to be? I think you can see the potential here for creative organizations to come up with clever ways of ripping you off. Now, although we see the law of supply and demand at work in all sorts of systems, it doesn't necessarily apply to all markets, because some markets are, well, they're gamed. What I mean is that certain industries are established by manufacturing demand through heavy marketing and then controlling the supply of that good in order to maintain favorable prices for the producers. Not for you. They manufacture scarcity, thereby implying value. Diamonds are a perfect example of this. Diamonds are completely useless. You can't eat them, you can't warm yourself with them, but you can stare at how nice and shiny they are. Yet, despite their utter uselessness, marketers have convinced people that diamonds are the perfect way to express your love for another person, and people will happily forego their groceries and utility bills in order to get their hands on one. But it doesn't end there, because this entire market depends on people believing that diamonds are extremely rare. They aren't. In fact, gold is more rare than diamonds are. But that's no problem. I mean, you as the producer, all you have to do is just lock away the excess supply, control that market, keep those prices high, keep telling people how rare they truly are. In many ways, the oil industry is very similar, where the market can easily be coerced by the main players. The deeper you start to think about this, the more you start to realize that the things you spend your hard-earned money on aren't necessarily determined by the natural law of supply and demand. Most of them are manufactured by companies trying to take your money out of your pocket. These market shifts affect your life in profound ways, from the price you pay for groceries to utilities to how much your boss agrees to pay you, because markets don't exist in a perfect vacuum like the graphs will have you believe. In practice, markets depend on each other. It's a symbiotic relationship, and a change in one market can easily cause a major change in another one. By understanding the law of supply and demand and how markets affect each other, plotting these graphs and comparing them to each other can help economists and business people, and even you, the consumer, get a better idea of the economic landscape so that you can make better financial decisions with your money. So that's it. That is the exciting world of supply and demand, how it works, how it affects your life, and how you can use your knowledge of it in order to try and make some better financial decisions. If you like this video, make sure you let YouTube know by hitting the like button, and if you'd like to see some more of these videos in the future, then just hit the subscribe button. You're right there. And with that, thank you for your time.